My name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old and I teach 5th grade at a public elementary school in Ohio. Last spring, I went to my half-brother's engagement party. It was the kind of event I almost didn't go to, a rented rooftop venue downtown, expensive wine, people I barely knew. But my mother had called me twice that week asking me to come, so I went. I wore a dress I'd had for 3 years. Nothing special. I just wanted to show up, smile, shake some hands, and go home. But about an hour into the evening, my half-brother's fiancée stood up in front of everyone to make a little speech. And in the middle of that speech, she pointed at me. Actually pointed and said, with a light laugh, "Oh, and this is his little sister. She's just a schoolteacher." A few people smiled politely. Someone at the far end of the table even chuckled. I didn't say anything. I just smiled back. But then the man sitting 2 seats to my left put down his champagne glass very slowly and turned to look at me. He was older, maybe late 60s, silver hair, a dark suit. He hadn't said much all evening. But now he was staring at me like he was trying to place a face from a long time ago. And something in the way he looked at me made my stomach go very still. Before I tell you what he said, please like and subscribe to Heartway Stories and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now let me tell you the whole story. The party had been my half-brother's idea, or maybe his fiancée's. I was never sure where one's ideas ended and the other's began. My half-brother and I grew up differently. His mother and my father had a brief relationship before my parents married, and he came into my life when I was 11, when his mother passed away and my father took full custody. We were polite to each other growing up. We weren't close, but we weren't unkind either. He was quiet, kept to himself, worked hard. I respected that about him. After college, his career took off fast. He got into finance, moved to Chicago for a few years, then came back to Ohio with savings I couldn't imagine and a confidence that filled rooms. I stayed home. I finished my education degree, got a job at a public school 3 miles from where I grew up, and I have been there ever since. I love my job. I genuinely do. People hear 5th grade teacher and they imagine an easy afternoon with construction paper and spelling tests. But I've sat with kids who come to school hungry. I've spotted bruises that didn't come from playgrounds. I've written referrals, made calls, stayed late grading work from students who needed every piece of encouragement they could get. It is not a glamorous job. It does not pay well. But I have watched children go from failing to reading full chapter books, from withdrawn to raising their hands, from broken to something like hopeful. That matters to me. It has always mattered to me. His fiancée didn't see it that way. Her name is Cassandra. She came from money, worked in marketing, and had a way of sizing people up in the first 30 seconds of meeting them. She smiled a lot, but the smile didn't always reach her eyes. The first time I met her at a dinner my father had organized, she asked me very nicely what I did for a living. When I told her, she said, "Oh, that's sweet," and then turned to talk to someone else. I didn't think much of it then. Some people just don't know what to say. The engagement party was held on a Friday evening in April. The rooftop venue was one of those places that looks like it belongs in a magazine. String lights overhead, low cocktail tables with candles, a skyline view. Waitstaff moved through the crowd with trays. There were maybe 60 or 70 people there, most of them from Cassandra's side. Her family, her colleagues, friends from her college years. My father was there, looking happy and a little overwhelmed. My mother couldn't make it because of a prior commitment, which I understood. I found a spot near one of the cocktail tables and introduced myself to the people nearby, a couple who worked in real estate, a woman from Cassandra's office, a man who'd gone to college with my half-brother. Everyone was friendly enough in that surface-level way that engagement parties tend to produce, warm, busy, not particularly deep. Cassandra made her rounds through the crowd gracefully, hugging people, laughing at the right moments, tilting her head in that practiced way that reads as warmth. My half-brother stayed near her, his hand on the small of her back, looking proud and genuinely happy. I was glad for him. Whatever our history, I wanted him to be happy. About 45 minutes in, the crowd began to gather loosely near the center of the rooftop. Someone tapped a glass, and Cassandra stepped forward to give a little welcome speech. She was good at it, natural, warm, funny in the right places. She thanked people for coming, said a few sweet things about my half-brother, made a joke that got a real laugh. And then she said she wanted to introduce a few special people. She called out her parents first, her two best friends, a mentor from her early career. Then she turned slightly and looked toward the family section of the crowd and said she also wanted to acknowledge her soon-to-be family. She mentioned my father briefly. Then she looked at me. "And this," she said with that same bright smile, gesturing in my direction, "is his little sister. She's just a school teacher." She gave a light laugh, the kind that signals the next person is supposed to laugh too. A few did. Someone at the table nearby chuckled quietly, almost reflexively, the way people do when they're not sure if something was a joke but don't want to be the only one not reacting. I felt the familiar warmth rise in my face. Not anger exactly, more like the particular embarrassment of being reduced in front of a room full of strangers, like hearing someone describe you as a footnote in your own family. I didn't react. I smiled. I'd gotten very good at that over the years. Cassandra moved on to the next name on her list. The attention in the room followed her. Glasses were raised. Someone started a small round of applause, and the moment passed the way moments like that usually do, quickly for everyone except the person it happened to. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip. That was when the man 2 seats to my left put his champagne glass down. I noticed it because of how deliberately he did it. Not setting it aside casually, but placing it carefully on the table like he needed both hands free to think. He was the kind of man who commanded the certain quiet attention without asking for it. Older, composed, the kind of stillness that comes from having been through a great deal of life. He'd been introduced to me earlier in the evening as a colleague of Cassandra's father, though I hadn't caught his name. At first I thought he was just resting, or maybe thinking about something unrelated. But then I realized he wasn't looking at Cassandra anymore. He was looking at me, not in a rude way, not with any hostility, or like someone who has just heard a piece of music they almost recognize, reaching for the name of it, not wanting to get it wrong. The conversation at the table continued around us. Someone was talking about a vacation. Someone else laughed at something on the other end, but this man was very still, his eyes on my face, working something out. I glanced at him and gave a small, polite smile. He didn't return it right away. He just kept looking, and then he looked down at the table briefly and then back at me, and I could see something shifting behind his eyes. A recognition that wasn't quite there yet but was getting closer. After another minute or two, he leaned slightly toward the person on his other side and said something quietly. The other person shrugged. The man turned back and looked at me again. The table had moved on to other conversations. My half-brother was now making his way through the crowd again, greeting guests. Cassandra was laughing at something near the bar. The evening had the easy rhythm of a party that had found its stride. But this man was still thinking about something. Finally, he spoke. Quietly, directly to me, not to the table. "I'm sorry to stare," he said. "I don't mean to make you uncomfortable, but I'm trying to place you." I told him I met a lot of people through work, so he might have seen me somewhere without remembering where. He nodded, but the look in his eyes said that wasn't quite it. "What did you say you do?" he asked. I told him I was a teacher. 5th grade. He repeated it slowly. His expression was still thoughtful, still searching. "Where do you teach?" I told him the name of the school, Richfield Elementary on the east side. Something changed in his face, not dramatically, just a slight shift, like a door that had been stuck had finally moved an inch. He looked down at the table again, then back at me, and for a moment he didn't say anything at all. "Do you remember?" he said carefully. "A student named Owen?" My heart stopped for just a second. I looked at him more carefully now. The silver hair? The careful posture? The way he'd been studying my face all evening? "Owen," I repeated. He nodded. "He would have been in your class about 3 years ago. Quiet kid. Small for his age, dark hair." I remembered Owen. Of course I remembered Owen. "Yes," I said quietly. "I remember him." The man exhaled. It was a long, slow exhale, the kind that carries a great deal of weight. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "He's my grandson," he said. The table had gone quiet around us. I wasn't sure when that happened. At some point, the nearby conversations had slowed and a few people were now paying attention to us without fully meaning to. He told me his name was Richard. He told me that 3 years ago, his grandson Owen had come home from school one day with a letter in his backpack. A handwritten note, not an official document, just a few lines on notepaper. The note said that someone at school was worried about Owen, that Owen had come in several mornings looking tired and withdrawn, that there were some things the writer had noticed that she felt she needed to address, that she had already filed the appropriate report, but she also wanted the family to know directly, because she believed Owen deserved to have someone fighting for him. The note was signed with my name. Richard looked at me steadily as he spoke. His voice was controlled, but there was something just underneath it that he was clearly working to hold together. Owen had been living with his mother and her boyfriend at the time. Richard had been aware for months that something was wrong in that household, but he hadn't been able to prove anything. He'd called the school once before and hadn't gotten much further than a voicemail. He'd spoken to his own son, Owen's father, who lived out of state and was working through his own difficult circumstances. Nothing had moved. Then my note arrived. That note, Richard said, started the process that got Owen out of that house. He stopped for a moment and looked down at his hands. He lived with me after that, for 1.5 years, until things were more settled. He paused. He's doing well now. He's 12, he plays baseball, he has friends. A pause. He reads, he loves to read. I felt something move through my chest, the particular feeling of hearing that a child you worried about for months turned out okay. Teachers don't always get to find out. Most of the time, the story just ends and you wonder. I thought about finding you for years, Richard said. I didn't know how to go about it. I wasn't even certain which teacher had written the note. Owen didn't know. He was 7. He looked at me carefully. And now here you are. I didn't know what to say. I told him what I tell anyone in those moments. That I was doing my job. That any teacher who noticed what I noticed would have done the same thing. He shook his head. I spent 1 year trying to get someone to listen, he said quietly. You were the one who actually did something. The rooftop had grown noticeably quieter around us. I don't think it was deliberate. It was just that the conversation had shifted in weight, and people nearby could feel it without knowing why. My half-brother had come back to the table at some point and was now standing a few feet away, listening. Cassandra was beside him. Her expression was harder to read. The brightness from her speech earlier had been replaced by something more careful. Richard straightened slightly in his chair and looked around the table. Then, in a voice that was calm but carried, he said, Cassandra introduced this woman as just a schoolteacher. No one said anything. 3 years ago, he continued, this schoolteacher wrote a handwritten note that she didn't have to write. She made a report she could have convinced herself wasn't her responsibility. She put her name on something that could have been uncomfortable for her professionally. He paused, and because of that, my grandson is safe. The silence on the rooftop was the kind that happens when a room full of people is recalibrating. Cassandra opened her mouth slightly and then closed it again. Richard turned to me one more time. I don't know if you remember every child you fight for, he said. I imagine there are many, but I remember you. And I will for the rest of my life. I was aware of how many people were looking at me. It was the opposite of comfortable. I'm not someone who likes being the center of attention, especially not like that. Not with emotion visible on my face in front of 60 strangers at a party I almost didn't attend. I told him I was really glad Owen was doing well. And I meant it more than anything else I said that evening. My half-brother came around the table and stood in front of me. He looked slightly stunned. He had known me his whole adult life, had eaten dinners at the same table as me for years, and I realized in that moment that he had probably never really known what I did in the hours between when I left in the morning and when I came home in the evening. Most people don't. He hugged me. Just once, briefly, a little awkward, the way hugs between people who aren't quite sure of their relationship always are. But it was real. I didn't know, he said quietly. I told him there was nothing to know. That I was just doing what I was supposed to do. Cassandra said something after a moment. A quiet, of course, and something about it being a wonderful story. Her voice had lost its earlier ease. She wasn't cruel about it. She didn't say anything unkind, but the performative warmth was gone, replaced by something smaller and more uncertain. She didn't look at me directly. Someone near the end of the table, a woman I didn't know, a friend of Richard's, shook her head slowly and then began to clap once. A few others joined in. It was brief and slightly awkward and completely genuine, and I didn't know what to do with myself. The party continued. Music came back on, conversations restarted, waitstaff made their rounds again. But something had shifted in how people looked at me as the evening went on. The woman from Cassandra's office asked me what school I taught at. The couple in real estate asked how long I'd been teaching. An older gentleman near the bar told me his wife had been a teacher for 30 years and that it was the hardest job he'd ever watched someone do well. Richard found me again before he left. He handed me a card with his phone number on it. "Owen's birthday is in August," he said. "If you ever wanted to say hello to him, no pressure. I just thought you might want to know he remembers you. He told me you were the one who always made sure there was an extra snack in your desk." I didn't trust myself to say much. I just told him thank you and that I'd hold on to the card. I left the party about an hour later. I drove home on the same route I take every day, past the gas station, past the old diner, past the turn that leads to Ridgefield Elementary. I sat in my car in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. I thought about Owen, about the morning I first noticed something was off. He'd come in 3 days in a row wearing the same shirt, which wasn't unusual on its own, but there was something about the way he was sitting, very still, very small, that made me start paying closer attention. I started keeping little notes, talking to him more, leaving a granola bar on his desk when I noticed he hadn't eaten. I filed the report because the guidelines said to, and because something in my gut said I had to. And then he moved to a different school district the following year, and I never knew what happened. Now I knew. I've been teaching for 7 years. I have had students I've thought about every year since they left. Some of them I've seen updates about through mutual connections or parents who stayed in touch. Most of them I just wonder about and hope. That wondering is its own kind of weight, one that doesn't go away, one that teachers mostly carry quietly because there isn't really another option. That evening, sitting in my car, I let myself feel all of it. The relief, the gratitude, the strange quiet joy of hearing that something you did in an ordinary Tuesday in October years ago had mattered more than you would ever have known. The next morning, I went to work. I made copies. I arranged the chairs. I put a granola bar in my desk drawer because there is always a kid who needs one. At 8:15, my students came in, loud and distracted and full of the ordinary chaos that makes the job exhausting and real. And I stood at the front of the room and I started the day. That's what I do. That's who I am, not just a school teacher. Never just anything. I've thought about that evening a lot since it happened. Not because of Cassandra, not because of the party or the rooftop or the string lights. I've thought about it because of what Richard said right before he left, that Owen remembers me, that a 7-year-old boy sitting in a classroom 7 years ago noticed that someone had put an extra snack on his desk, and that it mattered to him. That's the part I keep coming back to. I didn't write that note because I thought it would lead anywhere. I wrote it because I was worried and I didn't know what else to do. I filed the report because the guidelines said to, and because something in my gut said that staying quiet was not something I could live with. There was no moment of heroism. There was just a Tuesday morning, a quiet kid in the 3rd row, and a choice that felt small at the time. That's how it usually works, I think. The things that end up mattering most don't feel significant when you're doing them. They feel like the ordinary, unremarkable work of showing up. You make the call, you write the note, you leave the granola bar, and then the day moves on and you forget about it or you try to, because you have 23 other students and a stack of papers to grade and a parent email you haven't answered yet. What happened at that party wasn't about me being vindicated in front of a room full of strangers. I didn't need that. What it was a reminder that the work you do in the ordinary hours, the work no one sees, the work that doesn't come with applause or recognition or a title that impresses people at engagement parties, that work is real. It counts. It moves through the world in ways you never get to track. Cassandra called me just a school teacher, and I understand in some sense where that comes from. We live in a world that measures worth in salary and status and the kind of job title that sounds impressive at a dinner party. By those measurements, I don't rank very high. I drive a 7-year-old car. I bring my lunch. I spend my own money on classroom supplies in October when the budget runs out. But I also know that 3 years ago, a little boy came into my classroom tired and scared and wearing the same shirt for the 3rd day in a row. And I paid attention. And because I paid attention, something changed for him. That is not nothing. That has never been nothing. The thing about integrity, real integrity, the quiet, unglamorous kind, is that it doesn't perform. It doesn't announce itself. It just does the work because the work is right. And then it goes home and makes dinner and wakes up the next morning and does it again. It doesn't wait for Richard to stand up at a party and explain it to a room full of people. Most of the time, no one ever does. Most of the time, you just carry the wondering and you hope. I got lucky that night. I got to find out. But the truth is, it wouldn't have changed anything if I hadn't. Owen was still safe either way. That note still safe either way. That note still mattered either way. The work was still real either way. I think that's what I want to hold on to. Not the moment when the room went quiet. Not the look on Cassandra's face. Just the knowledge that showing up, really showing up, with your full attention and your full conscience is enough. It has always been enough. Even when no one is watching. Even when no one ever finds out. That's what I try to teach my students too. Not with a lesson plan, just by being the kind of person who notices when someone needs a granola bar and puts one on their desk without making a big deal of it. That's the whole thing really. That's all of it.